lovely people, welcome to another episode of Book Chat, the regular but not monthly roundup of what I've been reading recently. I've got a bit of a varied bunch to talk about this week, so I'm just going to dive into it.
Sophie Vlogs.
Starting with One by Sarah Crossan. I picked this up because of BookTube, because I heard that it's a novel, but it's written entirely in verse, which was intriguing. This follows Grace and Tippy, who are conjoined twins. At the start of the narrative, they are having to enter the school system for the first time as teenagers because they've always previously been homeschooled. So in part, this is looking at how they navigate all of the, traditional high school narratives, like making friends, starting to have crushes, stuff like that, except for obviously there's this added dimension of how people treat them and view them because they're conjoined twins. As this goes on, there is a second plot line which develops, which is much more serious and much more sad. I won't talk about that because spoilers, but suffice to say, I actually really enjoyed this. At the start, I didn't really get why it was written in verse. I was like, this is perfectly fine. It makes for like a interesting, quite a concise way of telling the story, but like, it didn't really add anything. By the end, and by where this second, more serious plotline goes, I actually found that that form really added something, and it really worked with what was being expressed by Grace. The type of poetry that was being used in this was, is it like free verse, that sort of thing? I don't know, I found that was really effective to portray these emotions, which are really like complicated and stuff like that. So this is a book that definitely, like, I enjoyed it more the more I got into it. I just felt like it really sort of like developed quite well. One thing I will say is I would have really liked to have had Tippy's perspective in this. The whole book is told from Grace's perspective, and there's a lot of exploring of like when you are a person whose life is quite literally joined to someone else's life, like, how do you define who you are? How do you find personhood? Like, are you yourself, or does being joined to this person, is that a positive, is that a negative? In Grace's case, I would say that being so close to Tippy is something that brings her so much joy. I thought that was just really interesting. I've never read a book about conjoined twins before, so this was sort of like educational in some ways as well. But suffice to say, this actually surprised me with how into it I got. It's added to the list of books that I had to try not to cry in public transport with. So there's that. After that, I read some non-fiction. That is Queer Intentions, A Personal Journey Through LGBTQ+ Culture by Amelia Abrahams. This is a series, I don't know, initially when I talked about it in the hall, I said it was like a series of essays. It kind of is a series of essays, but it's more like each chapter has its own focus, but the chapters all feed into each other, which I really liked. There's a real like progression throughout this book, which I found really fun. So Amelia Abraham is, she's a journalist, she's a lesbian. On the heels of a bad breakup, she sort of started this exploration of contemporary LGBTQ+ culture. She covers a lot of topics that are like, for example, pride festivals, drag culture, same-sex marriage. She's going all over the world, and she's looking at, so for example, like the topic of pride, she goes to a variety of different prides. She goes to like Amsterdam Pride, she goes to Istanbul, she goes to Serbia? I'm forgetting if that's right now. But suffice to say, she travels and she sees different people's experiences with these topics, and she's sort of just exploring like how relevant are these still where we are now versus where we were. So for example, like same-sex marriage, she goes over to America and she meets this couple who got married in the brief window that between California legalizing same-sex marriage and then it being repealed, people who got married in that time, and then obviously now marriage is legal in all of the states. But looking at the effect that period of having it recalled, what was the effect on people, and even people who didn't want to get married still had this massive impact on their mental health and stuff like this. And with Pride, a lot of it is these topics of like, in for example, stuff like London Pride, there are lots of concerns about the presence of corporations and is Pride selling out and that sort of thing. But then she goes to prides which have to fight to even be allowed to have their pride and not have it cancelled by police and stuff. And it's comparing those experiences of actually maybe having some corporate backing in these situations is necessary because you're not getting state funding. All of these things that, like, these are all valid conversations to be having in each sphere, but also when you take a look back and look at the wider picture and compare these things, it's very interesting to see what's a commonality, what is varying based on your background and stuff like that. So I found this really interesting. I would be interested to read more of Amelia Abrahams' writings. I think this is her first book, but I know that because she's a journalist, she has done like articles and stuff. If you're someone who is interested in like part memoir, because it is partly looking at her own life experiences, but also like part looking at greater topics through more personal lenses. We're talking about individuals and we're looking at individuals' experiences and then we're trying to apply those to cultures rather than making like broad sweeping histories type thing. But I thought this was really good actually. Next up is a book that I didn't like so much. I read The Wisdom of Sally Red Shoes by Ruth Hogan. I got this out from my library because it is my work book club book of the month. I was disappointed by this, essentially. I read The Keeper of Lost Things by Ruth Hogan. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was like a solid, enjoyable book. It wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. It went a little bit more like traditional romance rather than like I was looking for a little bit more like it sounded like it might be a little bit more like magical, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. This book is essentially a book about grief. Our main character, I've already forgotten her name. She lost her son when he was 2 years old. I won't go into details because that's sort of revealed to you as this goes on. And it's sort of like looking at, this is about like 10, 13 years later or something, and the way that she is still coping with the grief of that. She goes to this graveyard most weeks, and then she visits graves there, and while she's there there's a woman called Sally who wears there's a woman she calls Sally who wears red shoes, who like sings to the birds and blah blah blah, and essentially like through this relationship with Sally she like begins to have like a new appreciation for life and stuff like that. There's also a secondary plot line which follows someone else who is a mum of a teenager, and then there's some like personal struggles going on there, and these two stories are like paralleling. I think part of my issue with this is that like these two plot lines, 70 pages in, because I made a mental note of when I did this, 70 pages in, I made a prediction about how these plot lines were going to converge, and I had to wait until the very end of the book, which is like 340 something pages. I had to wait all of that time to have that confirmed as a thing, and then you didn't get to see any of the fallout of that, and that was frustrating to me, because like what I wanted was to see how this reveal would impact the lives of everyone that it touched, and instead what I got was a lot of focus on grief, which is what this book is about, fair enough, but like a sort of weird juxtaposition between deep focus on grief and then like this really like light-hearted, frivolous, jokey sort of tone every now and then, and I didn't like some of the humour because I felt like it was a bit oof, and then I don't know, there was just this, I found the tone a bit jarring, I found the pacing too slow, and then I didn't get the like emotional catharsis that I wanted that would have made it all worth it. So again, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars because it's not a bad book, so I didn't want to give it lower than that, but at the same time I found it a frustrating read. The quality of writing was not such that I was like really enjoying the process, and so I just got a bit annoyed. I haven't done my book club meeting yet, but I'm going to have to go into book club, and I hope other people have the same reading experience. Otherwise everyone else is going to be talking about how much they liked it, and I'm going to be like the Grinch in the corner who was like, bad pacing, humph. But like, that was how I felt. Next up was a really good book, and that is A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is the collected Oscar Wilde works, but it has a lovely cover. I just was overcome with a real wish to read this book all of a sudden, and I don't really, it's because I saw a really nice edition of it in a secondhand bookshop and I didn't buy it, and then I thought, I should really read that. I already knew the story of this because I have seen the really bad film, and also it's one of those ones which I think sort of, depending what else you read, like it gets referenced quite a lot. But I just was really interested to see how the reading experience of it would be, and I really enjoyed it. Oscar Wilde has such a gorgeous writing style if you like that sort of thing, which I do. So I really enjoyed like the process of reading it. There was a lot of like monologuing, sort of like big heavy speech moments, especially from like Sir Henry, which was interesting because Sir Henry is a terrible person. So like he's saying all these things, and there's all of these real like snappy little bits which I could see you could like quote and stuff, but at the same time everything he's saying I like deeply disagree with. So it's that interesting thing where your characters don't have to be likable to be interesting. So I found the looking at Dorian's journey and Dorian falling further and further into like to use words like sin and stuff that is used in this. That was such an interesting journey to just watch happen. And especially towards the end where he starts trying to like redeem himself and reform himself, but it's still so selfishly motivated. It raised so many questions to me about like, is it possible for Dorian to redeem himself? Can he undo all of this years worth of sin that he has been like frolicking in? Is there any escape from that? And is he capable, if there is a possible escape, is he even capable of seeing it and embracing it at the state where he's at? Because he's so far gone that to him, what to him is him doing like redeeming acts is still so hypocritical and still so like basic and stuff. I don't know, there was just a really interesting like look at one person's descent, I think. I think the ending of this book is absolutely cracking. Even though I knew how it was going to end, I was still just like reading it. I just thought it was really, really great. So yeah, I thought this was really interesting. I read a quotation somewhere that was like Oscar Wilde that was Basil the painter is how the world sees him, Henry is how he sees himself, and then Dorian is how he actually is or something, or how he aspires to be or something, which was really interesting to me because to me Dorian is not a good person, is not someone who I would aspire to be. Dorian is quite terrible in deeply, deeply many ways. So that's something which like I now need to like sit with and consider, I think. But on the whole, this was the first time I've properly read Oscar Wilde, and I really enjoyed it, and I will be dipping back into this collection from time to time. I want to read there's a short story, The Something Prince, can't remember what it is, but I want to read that because Holly Dunn Design has done a beautiful picture of it. I'll link to that down below. But yeah, suffice to say, interesting, really enjoyed. After that, I read, and I'm going to have to check on my Kindle because I can't remember who wrote it, Marriage of Unconvenience by Chelsea M. Cam something or other. It's not showing me on my Kindle, so I will link it in the description down below. This is just a really sweet, short, female-female romance. Essentially, our main character, Lauren, she's lost her job, she's having some money issues. She has this inheritance from her grandmother who died when she was very young, but it has a clause in it that she can only inherit if she's married. Her best friend, Cara, has got accepted to grad school, doesn't have the funding to go. They come up with a plan where they will get fake married, and they'll stay married long enough to cash in all the money, they'll split the money, and then they'll like carry on their lives. But obviously, because this is the tropiest of tropes, things go a little differently. Maybe Lauren has feelings for Cara, and shenanigans ensue. This was a really sweet romance. I don't read a lot of romance, but I just felt like reading something that was quite light and quite sweet to dip into, and this satisfies those things. It is extremely tropey, but that was kind of like what I was going for. It's a lot of fun. One of my niggles is the writing is not great. Specifically, the writing could have done with some editing, because, for example, there are some like really plot inconsistency, they're like, for example, the main character's best friend, Ansel, who she confides this secret in, when she first confides the secret in him, she comments that he's like a safe, he doesn't break, he's really good at keeping secrets. And then literally a little bit later in the plot, it's like they're talking about how, oh, he can't keep a secret to save his life because he's told their friend and blah, blah, blah. And again, the same character is initially introduced to you as being a gay man, and then halfway through the plot is dating women and talking about the dates on women he's going with. And you're just like, there were just a few moments like this where I was like, an editor should have picked up on this and been like, hey, what's going on, guys? So, like, it's not the greatest written thing, but for, like, a cute female-female romance that is quite tropey but quite sweet, it was a lot of fun. I'm going to end on a little run of comics. That is Batgirl and the Birds of Prey Rebirth issues 1, 2, 4. My friend Mark, when he's finished with comics, sends me comics, and I read them, and then I give them to charity shops. This was a lot of fun. I've never read any of the Birds of Prey stuff before, although I've been really interested to because I think they're a really interesting, like, DC team. This stopped just as I was really intrigued, and now I'm like, do I have to go and buy the rest to finish it? But essentially, Barbara Gordon, who I believe used to go by the pseudonym Oracle and do things, someone else is calling themselves Oracle and doing some shenanigans. And so Barbara, like, brings together the Birds of Prey team, and they're trying to, like, hunt this down, but they've also got their own personal vendettas going on, so you get, like, backstory into each of the characters whilst working towards this larger plot line. I had a lot of fun reading it. It was really great. Yes, fun times were had. That's about all I have to say on that, because I didn't really, like, I only read, like, 4 issues. Anyway, that is everything I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, have you read any of these books? I would love to hear your opinions on them. All of that and more in the comments down below. Do feel free. Otherwise, I will see you next week for something different.